welcome to Flash Forward, the show on the podcast where I talk about The Flash Volume 2, like every single issue. So we started from issue 1, and we're going forward. This is like post-crisis Flash, if you're new to this. We previously did Armageddon and War of the Gods, and now we're finally getting back to the regular Flash issues, where this week we're going to be reading issues 56 through to 68, which means we're going to be finishing off William Messner Loeb's run, and we're going to be starting Mark Waid's run, the probably the most acclaimed Flash run of all time, so I'm definitely looking forward to finally reading it, because I've never read it before. But without further ado, let's get on with, let's start with Flash issue 56, Murder on Ice, written by William Messner Loeb, with art by Greg LaRocque and Jose Marzan. So, in previous Flash issues, Wally had received notice that, like, the will of Joel McKent, aka Icicle, was being passed on to him for some reason, and that he was being called to, like, go and see the will and, like, possibly receive it. So he agrees to take Pied Piper with him, despite Piper not really liking rich people. Mason is like, why are you taking Piper with you? Like, he's gonna cause problems. And Wally's like, he'll be fine, especially if you come along. Like, do you want to come along? You might be able to help keep him in line. And Mason agrees to come with him. And, so, yeah, they head off to Joel McKent's estate, where they meet Joel McKent's family members. His son James, his daughter, or like his grandson James, his granddaughter, sorry, I don't remember their names because it's not super memorable. Yeah, so you got his grandson James, his older sister Doyle, and then what's the name of the sister? I'm trying to remember the name of her. I'm just gonna call her Grandma, like her sister, Lenora McDonald. Sorry. There's a lot of characters in this. So they're all Joel McKent's family members. They don't even really matter because they're not going to be around for very long. So they all start getting along and, like, conversing with each other. But, like, Joel McKent's family just kind of sucks. They obviously just there because they only care about the money. They don't actually care about their granddad. And they're annoyed by the fact that, like, Wally West is possibly going to get Joel's, like, their granddad's money. Because obviously he's not a member of their family. So they end up putting on the will on TV because Joe recorded it himself. He basically says that, like, he enjoyed being the Icicle, he became the Icicle, he enjoyed being the Icicle, and while he was the Icicle, who was a criminal, he faced two different Flashes. He faced both Jake Garrick and Barry Allen, and he looked up to both of them. Also, he mentions that, like, a crisis is currently going on, so he recorded this during Crisis on Infinite Earths. So he died during the crisis, and because he looked up to the Flashes, he decided that, like, if he died, his will would go to whoever is currently wearing the Flash mantle, like, whoever the Flash mantle is under. And because it's Wally West, the will is going to go to him. He also hates his family, and he believes that, like, you know, his family is going to be arguing so much that they're probably going to kill each other, and Wally's going to get all the money anyway. And then he moons them. He pulls down his pants and shows them his bare ass, and then it turns off, and they're all pissed off that he's like this. And then Piper's just like, you're all, like, sad that, like, you're not going to be getting money for, like, your cars, you stupid rich people. And so James and Pied Piper start having, like, a argument, which gets broken up by James's sister, and so they decided that everyone's going to go home until they've decided who's going to get the will. But they can't go home because there is currently a snowstorm going on outside, so they all have to stay at the estate. While Wally is sleeping, he hears a massive scream from Doyle's room, and he heads in to find Doyle encased in ice. He uses his speed powers to melt the ice and free her, and Doyle says that, like, they need to go check on her grandma. And earlier on, Wally noticed that Mason and the grandma, it seemed like they knew each other. And it turns out they did. They knew each other like 50 years ago. They're acquaintances, which Wally is surprised by. Their history doesn't matter. They just knew each other 50 years ago. Mason did some like work for her and teach her how to play Monopoly. So they decide to go and check on Doyle's brother James. And when they head in there, they find him with a bunch of ice picks, like icicles, stabbed into his chest. He's dead. He's like kneeling and there's blood everywhere. And Wally's just like, Piper? And he sees Piper at James's window holding a freeze gun. And he drops it and he's like, Wally, and then he runs away and Doyle's just like, how could you let him get away? He killed my brother. And Wally's like, there's no way that it was him that killed him. Piper wouldn't need to use a freeze gun. Like, he could have just killed your brother with his musical talents and not leave any kind of trace. And he picks up the freeze gun, and that's when the supposed ghost of Sean McKent shows up. Icicle appears towards, Wally, shoots him with the freeze gun, and freezes Wally, and that we're left on that cliffhanger where Wally has been frozen by Icicle. So we're going to find out what happens in issue 57. Alright, The Flash, issue 57. The Chilling Return of the Icicle. So Wally has been frozen by Icicle, and he decides to use his super speed in order to try and thaw himself out, and he has to do it quickly, because the heat of his speed is currently boiling him alive. He manages to get out of the ice just as Mason and Doyle show up, and then Wally decides to go and investigate who murdered James, so he puts on his Flash costume, heads outside, and then, he can't get through the snowstorms because of his, he can't see anything, and his super speed causes the snow to become, a wall, a brute force wall, so he has no choice but to head back to the mansion. When he heads back, he realizes that Mason and the assistant of Shaw's lawyer are missing. That's what I meant to say. And so Wally decides that he's going to try and check Shaw's tape because there might be evidence on there as to, who this new Icicle is if it isn't Jaw. So Mason shows back up with the assistant and reveals that the assistant had found a book, and before Jaw's lawyer can get his hands on it, Wally grabs it and reveals that it's a scrapbook, revealing that Jaw's butler is used to be a member of Jaw's ice gang when he was Icicle. And that, his sister already knew that, and that he was such a good butler that they employed him on as their butler. So, Wally decides that he needs to go looking for the missing videotape because they realize that the tape has gone missing. So he goes off to try and find it, and when he comes across Doyle and finds that Shaw's lawyer has been murdered. So Doyle was like, if Piper had killed him and run off, can't we go looking for him? And Wally's like, sure, but you gotta come with me. And so they decide to head out into the blizzard, and Doyle's like, why can't we run through it? And Wally explains why they can't, and so they decide that they have to walk through the blizzard together. And they eventually find Piper held up in a house with a family that he found who had crashed in the snow. And so Piper decides to stay with them while Wally and Doyle decide to head back to the house. But on their way there, they get attacked by Icicle in the middle of the snow, and Wally uses his speed to like throw like a tirade of like snow, a typhoon of snow at Icicle, while Doyle gets away. And Flash realizes that Doyle has gone missing, and so has Icicle. So he heads back to the mansion to try and find Doyle, but instead of finding Doyle, he finds the butler dying, and he says that, like, it's behind the trophy room. And Wally's like, what does he mean by trophy room? So he decides to go to Joe's trophy room. He finds a staircase that leads down into an Icicle museum with all sorts of, like, stuff in it. And Wally's like, wow, Joe really loved being a supervillain. And he's got the Flashes. Like, he's got his own memorial for the Flashes, which Wally is a bit like, wow, okay, that's cool. He comes to the conclusion that it's definitely not the real Icicle because his actual costume is still in the museum. Wally finds a bunch of tapes and deduces that one of them has to be the real tape because it's obvious that Joe kept a copy for himself because he knew that what his family would be like. So he puts the tape in and gets to see again that, like, Joe mentions that he, like, murdered a guy and disguised his face to look like him so that, like, you know, they would think that that guy was Icicle. So Wally deduces that, like, somebody used the same technology to change their face to look like Icicle, and it turns out that so this Icicle shows up, and Wally has figured out that it is James, that this new Icicle was James the whole time. And then another Icicle shows up, and James is like, that's impossible, it can't be you, you're dead. And these two Icicles fight each other, and Wally's like, who's this other Icicle? And he manages to knock out James, and that's when this new Icicle is revealed to be Doyle. And so Doyle thanks Wally for helping save her life and stopping her brother, but then she also tells Wally that they're going to be meeting in court because she deserves the will, not Wally. And that's where that's where the issue ends. It ends with Doyle and Wally preparing to go to court. It's like the end for now. And this whole storyline has been a bit like, it's fine. It's you know, I'm glad it was just a 2-part story. I don't really care about Icicle. It's a fine story. Murder mysteries are always cool. But I just know that these are characters that, like, we're probably going to see Doyle again, but I don't think we're going to see any of the other members of the family again. Also, what happened to Mason and the other characters? Like, we never even really figured out where they disappeared to. You know? They just weren't in the rest of the issue. Maybe we'll find out in a future issue. Who knows? We'll find out. Alright, now we're talking about issue 58. Into the Abyss. So Wally is talking to Chester about, the fact that once he gets the will, he's going to be able to absolve himself of all his debts. He actually has a plan. He's going to start a bunch of charities and then have them hire him, like, pay him for security so that he can just get all this money and then, like, he'll get rid of his debts in no time. So he decides to head off to court in order to take part in the, in the case of getting the will. So Chester is chilling on his own, and then Connie shows up and is basically just like, Wally doesn't, like, does Wally talk about me? Like, he hasn't spoken to me in a while. And Chester's like, yeah, no, he hasn't really been talking about you lately like he used to. He's been talking more about that Doyle girl. And Connie's like, yeah, Wally is always, like, losing interest really fast. I guess he just doesn't really love me anymore. And Chester's like, that's awful, because, like, you're a great girl, Connie. And she's just like, too bad you don't love me, Chester. And then Chester's like, yeah, too bad. And Connie leaves. So it's very much hinted at the fact that, like, Chester likes Connie, and that maybe he and Connie are going to end up together. So the court session gets underway, and Doyle's lawyer is instantly like talking about the charity that Wally is going to create with the money, and saying that like he has other reasons for doing it. And he's like, I know a bunch of minorities, so I've brought them on to speak for me. Like, this guy is despicable. He's like, I know a bunch of minorities, you know. This is my associate, Mr. Weber. And Mr. Weber is a black man. He's like, I am a black man, I'm a minority, and I can say for a fact that there are no homeless people in America. And he does the same with these other minorities as well, that all come on and they're like, there's no such thing as homelessness in America. Like, homeless people, they don't exist anymore. And it's actually like starting to go into Doyle's favor, and Wally's just like, oh, shit, we're dead. And then Abra Kadabra shows up and he's like, hey, you didn't include me, I should be here, I should testify. And Doyle's just like, who's Abra Kadabra? And Wally's just like, a crazed phony magician. He's like, crazed, phony, for that you shall die, all of you. And he uses his magic to zip them up into a tornado. And Wally's lawyer is just like, I hate it when legal cases end like this. So Abra Kadabra brings Wally and Doyle to Turtle's old base, where he turns into a little fat man and runs off. Because it wasn't actually Abra Kadabra, it was a guy in disguise. And then Pied Piper shows up and he's like, hey, I was the one that brought you here. And Wally's like, why did you bring me here? And Piper is like, it's because you're gonna use that money to make charities and be real selfish, like to have all the money go to yourself, when I think that you should actually use it to help these kids here. And he introduces Wally and Doyle to a couple of kids who have powers. There's this one kid who can like raise his body temperatures at will, but it's not good enough for foiling bank robberies. And there's this other kid called Flicker, who has the ability to travel through time, but only a second faster or slower than normal, and at random. And so he basically says to Wally, if you use the will money, you could use it to create like a place that can teach these kids how to use their powers to help people. And not just any people, but these people. These homeless people. And he introduces Wally and Doyle to all these homeless people that he's found and brought to this facility. And he's like, the only reason homelessness doesn't exist at the moment is because it's never shown on TV. That's why people don't think it happens anymore. But it's still there, and it's still very present. And then Piper explains that, like, these people aren't even homeless because of just, like, you know, drugs or things like that. These people are homeless because of metahumans. You know, a lot of these people are homeless because of the invasion. A lot of people's houses were destroyed because of War of the Gods. You know, he's like, that man's business was vaporized in a battle between the Titans and Brother Blood. And this guy's been on the Wayne Foundation waiting list for 5 years. And so, Wally and Doyle reluctantly agree to help Piper in his cause. And he gives them a couple of, like, Pied Piper costumes. And they use this guy named Gunner, who has teleporting abilities, to teleport them to a restaurant so that they can grab a bunch of food for these people. And so the restaurants are happy to give their food away, but they will get in trouble if they just give it away. So Piper has to pretend to be an outlaw. And so, like, the chef is like, oh no, they're stealing my food. Oh, how awful. Here you go, Piper. Tomorrow we're making, like, you know, fettuccine Alfredo. Also, one of the setbacks to Gunner's powers is that he can teleport people anywhere, but they get covered in leeches wherever they appear. Which is funny. So they grab the food and they head back to the base, and Piper says, like, yeah, you should create, like, a charity specifically to help these people and help train these people with their powers so that they can go out and help these homeless people, and then it won't be a problem anymore, you know? Like, the problem will never end, but this is just one solution to help make it better. And so Wally agrees, and Doyle heads off, and so they assume that Doyle might not have agreed to this. So Wally decides to head back home, and he reveals that like he's used his money to create a charity which he's decided to name after Barry Allen, called the Barry Allen Foundation, and run it the way he would have to make the world a better place. And then Doyle shows up, and it turns out she used her money to hire a couple of guys called Fahrenheit and Centigrade, and she also used the money to create her own costume and become the new Icicle. And now she's going to be a superhero and help Wally fight crime. Wally calls up Connie and is like, hey, you should come over and see Doyle. She's got this really cool costume. She looks great. And Connie's like, I bet she does. And hangs up on him. And and that's where it ends. So we're going into like a new era of the Flash, I guess, where like Doyle is now the new Icicle. Wally has started a foundation. I'm curious how long this foundation thing will last. Like, how long Mark Waid will... Like, unless William Messner Loeb gets rid of it right away, I'm curious to see how Mark Waid decides to continue this foundation idea. And if he just, like, he just gets rid of it right away, you know? I guess we'll find out in the coming issues. Alright, so, issue 59 of The Flash. The big old romance issue, Last Resorts. So, Connie is hanging out with Chester, and she finds she's recently received a newspaper that has the headline, Power Girl to have Flash's baby, which is obviously a fake story. Obviously, the issue was written by William Messner Loeb, art by Greg LaRocque, and John Nyberg now. Jose Martin is no longer, or Jose Marzan is no longer part of the Flash team. So yeah, she's reading the newspaper, and Chester's like, you know that it's not true. And she's like, yeah, of course I do, but like at the same time, like what if it is true? And so she's just kind of getting like upset. And it's like, but she refuses to ask Wally what the truth is. And she has a perfect opportunity when Wally shows up. He's like, hey, what are you guys doing out in the snow? Say, Chester, do you know there's a bunch of Japanese people moving into? Because like Chester's family, like some of his cousins are moving in. His like uncle who is like Japanese. It doesn't really matter in this issue. And so Connie gets really mad at Wally and is like, here, you can have her if you wanna. And then Wally's just like, am I in trouble? So Wally heads back home where Mason is. Mason's currently writing a letter to Leonora, who he's been seeing lately. And that's when Wally shows Mason the newspaper and is like, I should be able to like sue information like this. Also, this was under the door. And Mason opens it up and he's like, I know this handwriting. And it says, be careful, you are in great danger. Stay away from the McDonald mansion if you value your life. So Wally's just like, Mason? And Mason realizes that it's the handwriting of his son, Johnny. Because the reason Mason moved to Keystone City was so that he could find his son. And so he tries to call up Leonora in order to talk to her. And she answers and is immediately like, I need help. Like, come, please help me. And so Mason and Wally decide to head off to Leonora's mansion. And that's where Leonora explains to them, and like her butler explained to them that like there's this terrorist called the Last Resort who has been messing with Leonora, and that she's become like pretty messed up because of it. And then Power Girl comes in and is like, hey Wally, I saw it was in the newspaper and I'm gonna kick your ass for because I know that you probably gave in that story so that they'd pay you. And Wally's like, no, I had nothing to do with it. Also, can you please not kill me until I've helped save this woman from this terrorist? Like, let's work together and then you can kill me, alright? So Power Girl, says, sure, I'll help you. And then the phone rings and she picks up the phone and she's like, oh, it's for you, Wally. And Wally's like, oh, yeah, sure. And then when he puts the phone to his ear, the person has already hung up. It was Connie. She, after finding out that Power Girl is with Wally at Leonora's mansion, she's now convinced that Wally has moved on from her. And Chester's just like, maybe you're mad at Wally because you've realized that you're just not in love with him anymore. And Connie's just like, yeah, he's pretty darn smart. And whenever I'm around him, he makes me feel dumb. It's like, why do I feel so dumb when I'm around people? And Chester's just like, you're not dumb though, Connie. And Connie's just like, that's so sweet. It's a good thing I'm not in love with you. And Chester's like, yeah. um, so Wally decides to have a nap on the couch while Power Girl has the master bedroom. And that's when Mason comes in and wakes Wally up, and he's like, Wally, I woke you up because I heard somebody come in through the front door. And Wally's like, that's impossible. I would have heard them. And he's like, nah, you're in a pretty deep sleep, so it's not surprising. And then this guy that's clearly invisible kind of comes in and appears in front of them, and he's just like, hey guys. Wally's just like, who's this clown? He disappears. Mason tries to grab him and gets punched in the face and has his nose broken. And then Wally gets a flower pot thrown at him, and this invisible man is like, that's your last warning, stay out of this or else. And he leaves. So the butler heads down the stairs and gets knocked out by this invisible guy who grabs his gun. Leonora has her own gun, and Power Girl tries to go after the invisible guy. But she almost hits Wally by accident, and Wally has to grab her and the butler and move them out of the way because Leonora is shooting her gun at the invisible guy and almost hits them. And Leonora's just like, oh god, he's up here now. And so they chase him into a room. The door's locked, but Power Girl just smashes through it. And when they enter, they try to find this invisible guy, and they keep trying to grab him, and Power Girl eventually gets a hold of him, but this invisible, like, last resort, I guess I'll call him, tries pulling a cupboard on top of her, but she manages to grab it and use her super strength to throw it away. And then the invisible guy tries to get out the window, and Wally catches him and pulls off his mask just before he gets to leave, and it's revealed that the invisible man is Donnie Trollbridge, Mason's son. And that's where the issue ends. It ends with the revelation that it's actually Mason's son. So we'll find out how this story concludes in the next issue. Alright, so issue 60, Last Resort Part 2, written by William Messner Loeb, with art by Rod Wiggum and Frank McLaughlin. So no Greg LaRocque, which is sad. I like his art. Rod Wiggum and Frank McLaughlin do a fine job, but they're not as good as Greg's. Greg's is iconic for me. So Connie has created herself a costume because she wants to become a superhero now. She kind of looks like the Golden Glider. I don't know if that's the name that she might actually go with, but she plans on fighting crime with Wally, and Chester's like, you don't even have any powers. And Connie's like, Batman doesn't have powers, and he does alright. And Chester's just like, geez, Connie. Mason is working himself to the bone to figure out where his son is and what his son is trying to do. He discovers that, like, his son goes by the name Last Resort, and basically he is the last resort for anyone that needs help with anything. But he's not the kind of help that they might not want. They just don't have a choice but to go through him, because he's like a murderer, and he's like steals from people, but he's also helped people, and he's made people's lives worse. So it's kind of like he's not a guarantee that he's going to help you. He might actually make things worse for you, but he's your last resort. Wally and Piper have a conversation that takes a really dark turn, where Wally's just like, hey, I've been hearing about, like, this AIDS thing and how they've been referring it to it as the gay cancer, and because you're gay, Piper, like, I want to ask you, like, have you gone tested for AIDS? And Piper's just like, look, I'm very careful, Wally, like, ever since they started calling it the gay cancer. And it's just like, why are they talking about this? I guess because it was a relevant topic in the 90s, but, like, it's stuff like this that makes these years of, like, The Flash not age very well, because it just makes it feel very, very 90s, you know, with the topics that were only relevant during the 90s. Like, AIDS is obviously still relevant to today, but back when it was called the gay cancer, like, that was a 90s thing. You know, we've grown since then and we've learned more about it. Leonora hears some noises in her mansion. She goes with a shotgun. She finds Last Resort in one of her rooms looking through notes. He tries to get away, but she shoots him with the shotgun. Luckily, it's filled with rock salt, so it doesn't do anything to him. And Donnie starts crying as he runs away and smashes through a window. Meanwhile, this guy comes up and finds a letter that, at, like, at like he goes to like a place where like Wally, Power Girl, Mason, and Lenora are, and so this guy comes in, and they're talking about how like Lenora has created an advertisement for like supervillains to try and help them, and this guy found the advertisement and reveals that he worked for Frozo Foods, which was the company that Icicle owned, and that he was done wrong by Icicle and he wants his name cleared, and he hired Last Resort, but Last Resort was having a hard time finding the government information that he needed. So Wally agrees to help find it for him. Last Resort goes to the house again to try and find the information, and when he eventually finds a safe, and when he opens it up, he finds a note in it that says "turn around." He turns around, and Wally's there, and he's like, I can turn invisible, so you can't catch me. And Wally's like, yeah, well, I can speed really fast, and so I can just search the entire room until I finally hit you. And that's exactly what he does. He speeds around until he manages to hit Last Resort, knocks Last Resort away, and breaks his, like, invisible machine that he's got on his chest. So he runs through a door and gets hit by Power Girl, knocked back by Power Girl, and so he runs in the other direction. It turns out that Power Girl and Flash were specifically leading him to this stairwell that he runs down into a basement, where he finds the information that he's looking for, but also his father, Mason. And he's like, once we figured out what you were looking for, the kids and I ripped this place apart all afternoon. These files will help your client, and a bunch of other blacklisted employees too, I'll bet. Donnie, son, I think we ought to talk. And Donnie's just like, me too, Dad. And so they talk it out. Power Girl says to Wally that they make a good team, and that, like, she's sorry about how she's been over the last few days. She just really hates this whole newspaper fiasco, and Wally's like, me too. And she gives Wally a kiss on the cheek, and Connie just happens to come in at that very moment and see them. And Wally's just like, Connie, this isn't... And she's like, oh, Wally, I know the kiss was innocent. In fact, I'm not jealous at all. It feels wonderful. He's like, that's good, I think. And so Connie heads back to see Chester, and she reveals to Chester that, like, she's done with Wally. She's done trying to be a superhero. She's realized that the one man who actually cares about her, who she really loves, is right here in front of her, and it's Chester. And so Connie and Chester kiss each other, and there's a very nice splash page of them holding each other and kissing. So Chester gets a happy ending, you know? And who knows, maybe this will last. I think it's nice that Chester and Connie are in a relationship, especially because I don't like Connie and Wally together. I've also noticed that Linda Park hasn't shown up at all. Like, William just completely forgot about her. Like, she was a main character for a while, and it was kind of like, will they, won't they, with Wally and Linda, and now, like, she's gone. Maybe he's saving her for, like, because I know Mark Waid eventually, like, does something with that relationship. So maybe he's saving it for... He's allowing Mark to, you know, bring Linda back and kind of, like, do his own thing. And so we make it to William Messner Loeb's final issue in his extensive Flash run, issue 61, written by him, with art by Rod Wiggum and Frank McLaughlin. So I forgot to mention in the last issue that Mary and Eduardo, I think his name is, or like he has lots of different names, but the Italian spy or the Spanish spy or whatever, they're getting married. Wally received a letter saying that he's invited to their wedding. So we're at the wedding venue where Mary is getting fitted with her dress with Tina and... Is it Catherine? Is that her name? The Lady Flash, who used to be a member of Blue Trinity. Yeah, so they're all together. Wally is fitting Ernesto, that's his name. And he's like, yeah, I've had a lot of different names, but now that you're going to be my son-in-law, I'll tell you my real name. And then the door goes off, and Wally's like, hold it a second, that's probably the caterer. So Wally goes to answer the door, and he comes across Chester, and he and Chester aren't in a good place right now, because Wally's just like, you stole my girlfriend. And Chester's like, how long are you going to take before we can be friends again? And Wally's like, I don't know, it could be months. A year. He opens the door and his dad Rudy is there. He's like, hey son, great day for a wedding, huh? Wally immediately slams the door in his face and he's like, Chester, help me. And Chester's like, I stole your woman. And Wally's just like, I forgot about it. It didn't take as long as I thought. He's like, but Wally... He's like, my dad, who's supposed to be dead, is standing outside on my mom's wedding day, and he brought a date. And so Wally goes to open the door and talk to his dad, and his dad is just like, Wally's just like, I thought you were dead, like, you died during the invasion. And Rudy's like, yeah, but I wouldn't miss a day like this, of course. And so he ends up making his way into the wedding, so that's gonna, antics are gonna ensue because of that. Wally receives some roses as a gift from Fidel Castro himself from Cuba. And then Piper is on the phone with the minister, and the minister has been caught in traffic, so Wally has to speed off to go find the minister and help him. So he runs off as the Flash, finds the minister on the phone, and decides to help him get back to the wedding. But before they can go back, a guy on a motorcycle sees the character Tio Morrow on top of a bridge shouting about how the world's going to end and that he's going to commit suicide. Now, Tio Morrow is a classic DC villain who, as time has gone on, his life has just fallen apart and writers just keep adding on to it, and he's just become this drunk, depressed scientist. So he's preaching about the world that is going to end. So Wally and the minister brings the minister up to him so that he can talk him down, which they successfully do. They talk down Tio Morrow and they save his life. Mary comes into conflict with Rudy because they both hate each other. She's like, you miserable, depraved, worthless, evil man. I thought you were finally dead. He's like, I couldn't rest in peace without giving you my blessing. And so Mary goes off and she's just frustrated, and she's like, the cake's not even here. Wally's gone at the moment. He's not even here. Everything's going wrong. And Power Girl's just like, I can get the cake for you. It might be big and heavy, but I'll go get it for you. Because she's Power Girl. Wally comes back to the wedding with the minister. Mason and Lenora decide to get hitched there and then. They decide to get married. And so the wedding becomes a double wedding for Mary and for Mason. And Wally confronts Rudy's date because he recognized her, and it turns out that his date is actually Pyranus. Remember that demon with the fire powers that appeared during the IRA, or the IRS issue? Yeah, she's the one that's dating his dad, and the only way that she can stay on Earth is if she dates someone and is genuinely in love with them. And even though Rudy is only doing it to show her off, she genuinely loves him, and she's like, don't tell him, please don't tell him. And Wally's just like, this is awful, I hate this situation. So the wedding goes off. Mary gets married to Ernesto, whose name is revealed to actually be Rudolfo Valentino. So Wally's like, I guess I would have changed it too. And Mason and Lenora get married as well. They all have the cake that Power Girl was able to deliver in time. And then Wally confronts Rudy and tells Rudy that his date is a demon. He's like, she's a demon from the flaming pits of hell. And Rudy's like, I know, son, but underneath, ain't they all? He gives Wally a wink. And when I read that wink, and when I read that, I was like, I don't like Rudy as a character, but I read this and I was like, okay, you got me. I laughed. I thought that was funny. And so Wally just kind of has some cake, and he sits down and he's looking at everyone, and he realizes that everyone has someone except for him. Chester has Connie, Tina has Jerry, his mum has Ernesto, Rudy has, you get the idea. And then somebody's hand comes and places it on Wally's shoulder, and he turns around and it's Linda. And Linda's like, I came because of the free cake. And she's like, are you here alone? And Wally's like, yeah. And she's like, oh, that's good. And he's like, good? Did she say good? This is not a bad way to end my adventure, to end an adventure. And that's where we end William Messner Loeb's run, is finally establishing that Wally and Linda will eventually become the main like Linda will become Wally's main love interest, and that will be the consistent relationship for him going forward. Like, there might be other love interests that kind of get in the way, but like it'll always go back to them. For a final issue, I think it was good because it tied up what, like, William had already tied up all of like the plots that he was doing at the time, and he's kind of left it very, like, he left it open for Mark to do whatever he wanted, you know? Like, he closed off all the stuff and left plenty of room for Mark to now leave this issue and do whatever he wants. And the first thing that Mark did was rewrite Wally's origin. And so next we're going to be starting Mark Waid's run, which starts with a 5-part retelling of Wally's origin. So look forward to that when we read The Flash Year 1. Alright, so now we begin Flash Year 1. It's actually a 4-issue, like a 4-chapter event, retelling of Wally's origin, not 5. I thought it was 5 chapters, it's 4. So we're going to be starting with Chapter 1, Thunderstruck, written by Mark Waid in his debut on the actual Flash series, with art by Greg LaRocque and Jose Marzan Jr., who have both returned to doing the Flash series, which I'm glad. I like Greg LaRocque. Some people don't like him. I like his art. I think he draws the new Flash costume the best. He's the one that does like the white eyes, and I really like that, and the metallic look for the costume. So the issue begins with Wally going to an airport in order to find a bomb that has been planted there by terrorists. The way he tells it is through a joke where he's like, 2 terrorists walk into a jail cell. Okay, actually, they're thrown into a jail cell following a series of local bombings. At 11:42 a.m., the cops overhear the first terrorist say to the second one, tell them about the airport bomb. I had you set for 12 midnight. Maybe they'll cut us a break. Then the second one says, wait for it, 12 midnight? I thought you said 12 noon. So while he rushes through the airport in order to try and find the bomb, he looks everywhere. He tries to think of, like, where is the least expected place that you would find a bomb. So he goes to a hair salon and starts checking around, and he can't find anything in there. And then he heads to the Lost and Found area and deduces that, like, whatever you're looking for is always in the last place you check, and he just happens to find it in the in the last spot of the airport. So he picks it up. He has barely any time to get it out before it explodes, so he goes the fastest that he's ever gone. Wally talks about how, as a kid, he would hold firecrackers right up until they blew up, and he became really good at letting them go at the last second, and that his dad would beat him for it. So he does that with the bomb. He waits until it's about to explode and manages to let it go just in time after having jumped over like an aeroplane so that the bomb would explode in the air and not hurt anybody. After that, he heads off to get some food because he's been using his super speed and his metabolism leaves him famished. And while he's eating there, Ira West shows up. Now, Ira West is Iris West's dad and Wally's granddad. And he hasn't been in The Flash for years, so this is his first time showing up again. So he and Wally have a reunion. Wally even mentions that even though he lives near Ira, he hasn't seen him in a long time. He mentions how there's a reason, but we don't really get to find that out. Maybe we'll find out later what his reasoning is. But he starts talking about his family and Iris West. He heads to Ira's house, and while Ira is making a coffee, Wally checks through Iris's like Flash journals where he sees pictures of like Barry and stuff. He's like, I wonder if there's any pictures of me in here. Now, I was nothing compared to Barry and Iris. You know, they were the king and queen. And then he comes across a journal that's specifically made for him. And as he looks through it, he starts to think back to his childhood when he was 10 years old and he was sent to go and visit his Aunt Iris. So we meet a 10-year-old Wally who arrives in Central City where he meets Iris, and Iris says, like, hey, you want to go to the Flash Museum? And Wally's like, yeah, like, I'm the biggest Flash fan, I want to go to the Flash Museum. And as they're making their way there, they see the Flash taking down some crooks, which Wally wants to stay and watch. while Iris goes and does her reporting, because the Flash is a big story, especially at this time. So the Flash is dealing with some crooks, and he starts using a tornado against like 2 of them, but he misses the 3rd one, and before Wally can, like, he can't hear Wally because he's moving so fast, so before Wally can warn him, Barry trips over, and then the 3rd guy draws a gun on him and is about to shoot him, but Wally steals somebody's wrench and uses it on a nearby fire hydrant to hit the guy with a ton of water, saving Barry. And then Barry knocks the 3 of them out and is like, "That was quick thinking, son. You saved my life. Thanks." "Sure, and anything for you, Flash. You're my hero." "Not today, pal. Today, you're my hero. Take care." And Flash leaves, and Wally's just like, wow. And so after that, Barry just happens to show up, and Iris introduces him to Wally. And he's like, "Oh man, I'm sorry I'm late. I'm a slowpoke." "Yep, that's just it. Naturally slow." And they had to go get something to eat. And Iris is like, "Your hair's wet." And Barry's just like, "Yeah, I just stepped out of the shower. That's all." And so Wally, Iris tells Wally that Barry is a police officer and that he's a police scientist. And Barry talks about his life to Wally, and Wally's just like, "Man, this guy's so boring. He's so boring that you'd think he'd be hiding some kind of secret." So Iris has to go off to work, and Barry has taken the rest of his afternoon off so that he can hang out with Wally. So he takes Wally to his lab to show him around, and he says to Wally, "Hey, I'm friends with the Flash. I told him, and I've got him to come here and meet you at 2 o'clock. He's like, "Just look at that door and you'll see him." And so Barry turns into the Flash while Wally's looking at the door, and the Flash comes in, introduces himself to Wally, and basically explains to Wally that, because he's friends with Barry, Barry allows him to use his lab in order to do things that he wants to. And Wally's just like, "How did you get your powers?" And Barry's like, I had all these chemicals, in this cabinet right here, and then some lightning flashed down, and I got covered in the chemicals, and that's how I got my powers." And Wally's like, "Man, I'd love to go through that too. I'd love to get powers." And Barry's like, "Well, there was a 1 in a billion chance that was going to happen. Because, lightning never strikes twice in the same place." And then all of a sudden, a lightning bolt strikes through the window and hits Wally, dousing him in the same chemicals that Barry was doused in. And Barry is just like, "Wally!" as he gets struck by lightning. And that's where Chapter 1 ends. A really good beginning to it. Mark Waid doesn't change very much. Instead, what he does is he takes Wally's origin and he just expands on it, and he just adds more to it. He adds more character, he adds more, more development to the relationships of the characters. It's not as simplistic as it was back then, and I appreciate that he doesn't, drastically change it. He just makes it better, It's good. So starting off with Chapter 2, Wally has just been struck by lightning and chemicals, and he's just like, and so Barry's like, "Are you okay? You all good?" And Wally's like, "Yeah, I feel fine. I just wet and smelly." And Wally is convinced that this is a prank by Flash, and he's like, "No, this isn't a prank. This isn't a prank. This happened, and I did not expect it to happen." And Wally's like, "Does that mean I have super speed?" And Barry's just like, "Let's test it out. Try and catch this microscope." And he knocks the microscope off, and Wally tries to catch it, and he can't catch it. He doesn't have super speed. Or at least, he doesn't think he does. But Barry comes to a conclusion that maybe he does have super speed, they just gotta try and trigger it. So he decides to try and test it by telling Wally to come with him and play a quick game of baseball. So he grabs Wally and he's like, "Hey, you ever traveled through walls before?" And Wally's just like, "Just one. The one that we're about to go through." And he vibrates through, Barry vibrates through the wall with Wally in his arms. He runs to a field and basically says to Wally, "You gotta go catch this ball." I think the way our speed works is that, when I got my speed, it didn't happen right away until I actually pushed myself to run after something, and then my speed activated. So we're going to do the same thing with you. I'm going to throw this ball, run after it, and try and catch it, and maybe your speed will activate. So he throws the ball, and Wally runs after it, and he notices that the ball starts slowing down to the point where it stops, and he's able to grab it. And it turns out that he was running at super speed, because when he looks behind him, the grass behind him is all on fire. And Wally's just like, man, the ball froze in the air. And Barry's like, no, the ball didn't stop in the air. You were the fastest thing on the earth at the time, and so you were running so fast that it seemed like the ball had frozen in time. And because Wally has just realized he has super speed, he does what any kid would do. He starts just running around the city and just having fun. Like, he runs around the city at super speed. He steals a police officer's hat. Just runs past him and grabs his hat and drops it off. And then Barry catches up to him, and they see a couple of crooks, and Wally fights some crooks for the first time alongside the Flash. So they're beating up these crooks, and then the last crook realizes that he might not have a chance to escape, so he makes a distraction for Barry by shooting the tire off of a truck carrying a bunch of bricks. So the guys on the truck crash and start flying out of the truck, so Barry uses his abilities to create a tornado in order to save them, and Wally can't really do anything because he doesn't know how to do that. So instead he decides to deal with the guy that has the gun. So this guy shoots at Wally, and Wally uses his super speed to kind of grab the bullets and maneuver them away from himself, and then knock the guy out. And then Barry and Wally work together and use their super speed to encase them all in the bricks that were knocked off of the truck, so that they're all stuck in like a round brick wall. And then a bunch of reporters show up, and Wally realizes that one of them is Iris, and Barry's like, alright, we gotta get out of here, and grabs Wally. Wally tries to tell Iris that it's him, but Barry covers his mouth. And when they get back, Barry's like, you can't tell Iris who you are. You gotta keep this a secret, at least for now. Because if anyone finds out that, you work with the Flash, your life is going to be in danger, Iris's life is going to be in danger. And so the way we're going to keep your secret and your identity a secret is, I've got something for you. And he hands Wally a ring. He's like, press that button. And Wally presses the button, and a costume pops out, and Barry's just like, here, try it on. And Wally puts the costume on, and it's his original Kid Flash costume, which was just a little version of Barry's costume. It's not the yellow and red one. It's just a small version of Flash's costume, because that's what he starts off with, and then eventually he would get a new costume later. And so he puts the costume back in the ring just as Iris comes in, and so Flash leaves, and Barry arrives just after, saying that he was off getting some mail. And Iris finds out that the Flash was here and is like, oh, the Flash was here? Damn, you're getting better reporting than I am. All I got was this souvenir for your scrapbook. And she has a picture of the guys that were stuck in the brick wall. And she and Barry kiss each other, and the three of them decide to head off. And decide to head off and hang out. We don't really know exactly what they're going to be doing, but they're going off to spend the day together, because Wally's not got much time. He's only got the summer, and then he's going to be heading off. So adult Wally in the future is contemplating to himself about how he's like, man, it was a serious mistake letting the newspapers pick a name for me, because they were the ones that called him Kid Flash. And he's like, together we were Flash and Kid Flash, the fastest team alive. And to this day, I think of that summer, that partnership, as the happiest time of my life. Too bad it had to end. And it shows Wally looking at a picture of Barry on the ground and Mirror Master standing over his body. So it seems like in the next chapter, we're going to be dealing with Wally's first encounter with Mirror Master as Kid Flash. So I forgot to mention in the last chapter that the gang that Barry and Wally took down together were an exact copy of the gang that Barry had taken down earlier and put in prison. But they were still in prison, which means for some reason there's copies of gangs going around. So that's very important because, as we know, Mirror Master is the main villain of this issue. So it begins, chapter 3 begins with Wally and Barry training together. Barry is trying to train Wally how to vibrate through walls. Wally tries to vibrate through the wall because Barry tells him to focus, and Wally tries to focus. He tries to vibrate through the wall. He thinks he's vibrating through the wall. He's like, I'm doing it. But it turns out he was just vibrating at a frequency that allowed him to drill through the wall, so he left a silhouette of himself in the wall. He's like, man, I can't do it. Barry's like, no, all you have to do is just focus. You just got to figure out, like, eventually you'll figure it out. As long as you keep focusing, you'll be able to do it. While they're running together, Wally tries to convince Flash, because he doesn't know it's Barry, to date Iris. Because he's like, you're really cool, and you're way cooler than that Barry guy. And Flash is just like, hey, Barry's a cool guy. I don't want to get in the way of him and Iris. You should be less harsh on him, and you should get to know him, because, like, he's a cool guy. Wally's like, fine. So, Wally eventually comes to the conclusion that, like, so he finds out that, like, that Mirror Master is creating copies of people so that he can steal money from banks and things, and then the copies disappear. Which is what happened to the gang that they caught. They, like, faded away, and so he's coming to the conclusion that these must be the copies of Mirror Master, because Wally knows who Mirror Master is. He's not stupid. He knows that Mirror Master is a well-known Flash villain, even at this age. So he goes and visits Iris, and Iris talks about this this doctor named Eldon Garrett who is coming, and that she's going to do a report on him. And Wally sees a picture of him and notices that he's blind in his left eye, not his right one, but in the picture, his right eye is covered. But the library in the background still has library the right way, so it's not a flipped photo. So he comes to the conclusion that this guy must be a copy created by Mirror Master, just like all the other ones. Because he's not just creating copies of people, he's creating mirror copies of people, mirror images. So Wally heads off and he calls the Flash in order to meet him at the place where this fake Eldon is going to be, and because he wants to lead the Flash to Mirror Master, because he feels like Eldon is going to head off to Mirror Master and give away his location. So he heads to the library where Eldon is, this fake Mirror Master copy, and it comes out and gets in the car and heads off, and Wally is like, do I chase after him or do I wait here for Barry? Like, if I don't chase after him, we're going to lose him. And so he decides to head off after him, and then the car disappears, and Wally's like, how did it disappear? And then he realizes that the car has entered a place covered in mirror panels, which is why it looked invisible. So he heads into Mirror Master's base. Barry arrives at the library and realizes that Wally hasn't met him there, so he knows that something's going on. So he heads after Wally. Wally confronts Mirror Master and gets trapped inside a mirror. Mirror Master basically is just like, I wasn't expecting you to come here. I was trying to lure Barry, but I guess I'll just capture you and then he'll come anyway. So Wally gets trapped inside, and then he decides to create like a fake Wally West, or he creates a fake version of himself to trick Barry, like a mirror copy of himself. So when Barry comes in, he attacks the mirror copy of Mirror Master and smashes it to pieces, and all the glass like cuts into him, killing him. And Wally's just like, no, Barry, he's dead and it's all my fault. But then all of a sudden Mirror Master turns around and he's just like, what? And Wally breaks out of the mirror in a fit of rage and attacks Mirror Master multiple times, just beating the crap out of him, and Barry has to stop him from beating him to death. And Wally's just like, Flash, you're alive, but how? I meant to say Wally was like, oh, Flash is dead, because he doesn't know it's Barry. And Flash is like, well, a good magician never reveals his secrets, but you, I'll tell. I did it with mirrors. And he explains to Wally that when he arrived, he used his super speed to figure out how Mirror Master's mirror technology works. He created a mirror copy of himself to send in as to die to the trap, so that he could then appear after. So that's basically what Barry did. So Wally and Barry grab Mirror Master and take him to prison, but then Wally starts feeling a bunch of pain. He's just like, ah! And so they go to Ira West to figure out what's going on with Wally, and it turns out that because Wally is a child, the powers are affecting his body differently to Barry, and so every time he uses the powers, like his speed powers, he's going to be in a ton of pain. And so Barry is like, son, I hate to tell you this, but your running days are over. Near as I can tell, if you ever use your powers again, they'll kill you. And Wally's just like, ah! He's like really sad. And that's where this chapter ends. It ends on the revelation that Wally may never be able to use his powers again. So this is Mark Waid tying this into New Teen Titans, where it was established that like Wally's powers were killing him. So Mark Waid is retconning it so that it happened as early as when he was a kid, you know. And it would also explain why Wally doesn't team up with Barry very often and doesn't appear in Flash comics very often, is because he isn't able to use his powers all the time, and that he risks it when he's teaming up with the Teen Titans. And maybe it even explains that the reason why he hangs out with the Teen Titans more is because he knows he can use his powers with them without Barry knowing, so that he doesn't get in trouble with Barry. And if that's the case, I feel like that's the case. Or at least that would be my headcanon. You know, I don't know if Mark Waid explains it, but like that makes sense to me. And so we make it to the final chapter of Year 1, Live Fast, Die Young. So this chapter leads off from chapter 3, where Wally has found out that he can't use his powers anymore because they give him incredible pain. So it's the end of the summer. He has to head back to Blue Valley in order to live with his parents, which he doesn't want because his parents are terrible to him and he hates living with them. He talks to Iris and he's just like, I hate living with them. Like, why do they don't even love me. Like, they treat me so badly. And Iris just, she's kind of the example of an adult who just doesn't understand exactly what's going on. You know, she's like, I understand what, like, my brother and stuff can be, but I don't think she really understands exactly what Wally is put through, or what his father puts him through. You know, so she gets to their place and drops Wally off. A tornado is actually on the news, like, is apparently coming towards Blue Valley. So things are getting quite windy. Iris ends up leaving because she doesn't want to be around when the tornado hits, and Wally is forced to just live an ordinary life. An ordinary, boring life, washing dishes with his mum, listening to her talk about stuff that he doesn't care about. And then Rudy shows up, and Wally accidentally drops a dish, and just like, that was one of your mother's favorites. Stop falling around, son. Pay attention to what you're... And Wally's just like, I'm sorry, okay, I'm really sorry. And he runs away because he's obviously afraid that, like, his dad is going to beat him. So he runs into his room and slams the door and starts crying. He's like, now I couldn't even catch a stupid plane. It wasn't just Dad I was angry with, it was the whole world, starting with Iris. She said she was my best friend, but how could she be? I couldn't tell her anything. How could I show her what a bullet looks like when you're moving fast enough to catch it? Or tell her the things you hear on the other side of the sound barrier? Or get her to understand how cold and empty it felt to be slow again? It wasn't fair. I'd be given the gift of a lifetime. Just to have it snatched away. And then he starts ripping all of, like, his Flash posters and all of his dolls, his Flash dolls and stuff, because they just remind him of what he's lost. And Wally is, like, crying. And his dad and Rudy comes up to the door and he's like, son, come on out. This weather's turning ugly. We might ought to hole up in the basement for a little while. And he's like, son? And he opens up the door and Wally's gone out the window. He's ran away. And things are really bad. Like, things are pouring real bad. Wally's run really far and now he's gotten lost in Old Man Crenshaw's field. And he's stuck up in a tree. And then he sees that his dad is climbing up the tree. He's like, come on home, Wally. This is a dangerous place. This is a dangerous place for you to be right now. Wally's just like, doesn't matter. You don't even care about me. You don't love me. And he's like, if I didn't care about you, why am I here? He's like, I'm not going. It's not open for discussion. No, I won't live with you. I don't love you. And Rudy's like, what? He's like, I said I don't. And then a lightning flash strikes the tree, knocking it down. Wally falls to the ground. The tree lands on top of Rudy. Wally tries to take it off of his dad, but it has him pinned. He's like, Dad, get up! And then the tornado comes towards him, and Wally doesn't want his dad to die, and so he figures that he needs to stop the tornado. So he thinks back to when Barry had stopped the tornado himself. He ran clockwise around the tornado, and using his own wind was able to offset the tornado. So Wally decides to try to do that. He puts on his Kid Flash costume, starts running around the tornado, but he has a really rough time. It's causing him a lot of pain, but he decides to push himself through it to the point where he's like bleeding out of his mouth. He can taste the blood as he runs around this tornado. And eventually he manages to... he pushes himself so hard to the point of like breaking. He manages to offset the tornado and break the logs pinning his dad. And he saves him. He's like, son, are you okay? Well, he's like, I'm great. Let's get you out of here before this storm acts up again. I wouldn't worry too much, kid. I think we're safe. Ugh, you know what they say. Lightning never strikes twice in the same place. Well, he's like, but it did. And so future Wally is talking to, like, present Wally is talking to his dad. And, it's not his dad, Ira. He's talking to Ira West, his granddad. And he's explaining about how, like, everything... Like, he got his powers and it was all, like, just a coincidence that it happened. And Ira explains to him that it may very well not have been a coincidence. And he brings up something that had been brought up earlier, where Barry may have created the lightning strike that hit Wally through his own powers by thinking about it. And Wally's like, man, is that even possible? And Ira tries to offer Wally some coffee, and Wally is like, nah, I gotta go. And then he's like, oh, I'm sorry to disappoint you. The reason why I haven't been seeing you lately is because you remind me of Iris, and I never got a chance to say goodbye to her. Wally doesn't know that Iris exists in the future. I don't know if that future still exists, but, like, she exists in the future in, like, the body of another woman, and was living in the future with Barry before he came back in Crisis and died. But yeah, he explains to him that, like, he never got a chance to say goodbye. She died so suddenly and so pointlessly. So did Barry. But I've managed to make some peace with that. When I grew up, I took his costume and name to honor his memory. I just wish I had some way to honor hers. Barry may have taught me how to be Kid Flash, but Iris taught me how to be Wally West. And so Ira and Wally decide that they're actually going to have dinner together. So Wally's like, sit down, I'll cook, you talk. How about lasagna? And Ira's like, that was her favorite. And Wally's like, I know. And so it ends with them kind of just being like, do you have time for this? I have all the time in the world. Love you, Grandpa. I love you too, Wally. And it ends on a picture of Iris and Wally years ago, which is really sweet. And that's where it ends. That's the end of Wally West, like, Flash Year 1. Really good update to Wally's origin. I was surprised we didn't get the yellow and red suit, but I'm kind of glad, because that isn't Year 1. You know, that's like Year 2 of Wally as the Flash. Yeah, this was really good. This was a really good expansion on, like, it expanded Wally's previous history and changed certain things without making it, like, too different, where it's still pretty much the same, except it adds Mirror Master as Wally's first adversary instead of, like, the animals escaping from the zoo, which was always a really dumb Kid Flash story. But now that that's over, we're going to be moving on to Flash issue 66, where we get to see Mark Waid write a Flash story outside of, like, this will be his first Flash story that isn't, like, you know, Wally's origin. So let's see what he does. The Flash versus Aquaman, the race you demanded. Warning, this scene does not appear in this issue. It's got Aquaman on the cover, then he's like, not. So it's like, makes you think that, like, they're gonna race, but obviously that's not the case. So in issue 66, the art is done by Michael Collins and Roy Richardson for now, like, just for this story. Written by Mark Waid, obviously. So the story starts off with Wally he's under the water. He's underwater in his Flash costume, and Aquaman is coming at him with swordfish. He's kind of like, "Hey, want to know how I got here? Well, it all started when I was on this cruise ship. So early in the day, Wally and Linda are on a cruise ship because Linda has gotten new sponsors ever since her talk show contract came up for renewal. So they get to go on this cruise ship, and Wally offers to teach Linda how to play tennis. But because he's such a showman, he just starts playing tennis himself and doesn't even teach her, and just starts showing off to everyone. And Linda's just like, alright, thanks Wally, I learned so much. I'm a regular Steph Graf now. She storms off, and Wally's like, hey, I'm sorry, like, I have like a short attention span. Then, all of a sudden, one of the people on the ship points out that there is a sperm whale. So Wally and Linda go to see the sperm whale, and Wally's like, it's such a beautiful sight. Well, so I believed. And that's when 3 other sperm whales come in, and they're surrounded by 4 sperm whales, and they're just like, what the heck is going on? And then the whales start bumping the ship and steering it towards a bunch of rocks, and they're like, oh no, we're gonna crash! And they crash into the rocks, and Wally gets knocked out, and as he's passing out, he sees Aquaman and a mysterious woman standing behind him on some rocks. Wally wakes up tied upside down with some other people that were on the shipwreck, with sharks underneath them, while some of the other people that were on the ship, like Linda and some of the other survivors, are helping move rocks for this character named Marine Marauder, who is a villain that Wally has seen before in the JLA case files. She's basically evil Aquaman. Like, she has the same abilities as Aquaman, but she's a pirate. So Wally manages to escape from the ropes that are tying him upside down, and he goes to attack Marine Marauder. And she's like, if you attack me, like, they're all gonna get eaten by sharks. Unless you help me. And Wally's like, alright, like, I could probably, like, Linda's like, can't you just save them all? And Wally's like, I could probably save 2 of them, but, like, I don't think I'm gonna have enough time to save everyone. And then she's like, yeah, but you can run on water. Can't you just run on water and get all the way to the other side? And he's like, I don't think I have enough momentum on this little island that we're on. Like, I might have enough momentum to get to, like, that small island over there, but, like, I don't know where the main coastline is. I don't know how I'm gonna get back there. So, Marine Marauder explains exactly what she's after. She's after an Atlantean treasure known as the Lost Crown of Enlil. Enlil is a Babylonian god, the storm god, who, if you put on the crown, you gain control of all of the 7 seas. So she's been researching it, and she's come to this island, and underneath the island is a grotto, and she believes that the grotto is an entrance to the palace where the crown is hidden. So she used these ship survivors in order to help move rubble for her, and then she also uses the power of the ocean's creatures to help move the rubble underneath, that's underwater as well. And as she was calling for help, Aquaman came, and she believes that she has control over Aquaman with her powers because he's half fish. So Wally reluctantly agrees to help her in order to set everyone free. So he puts on his Flash costume that Linda happened to bring with her, and then heads underwater with a scuba gear to help move the rocks. And so that's why he thought like Aquaman was coming at him with swordfish, but he was actually coming to help. So Flash and Aquaman help each other to open up this mysterious rock door. Like, Flash moves a bunch of rubble, Wally moves a bunch of rubble, and sees a stone door, and Aquaman uses the help of a giant squid to open up this stone door, and Wally and Aquaman find themselves in this lost palace. They see the chest, but a bunch of water is coming through, so Wally's like, shit, we gotta move that chest now, otherwise the tide is gonna smash it into a wall, and then we're all done for, because the crown's gonna get smashed to pieces, and Marine Marauder isn't gonna be happy about that. So Wally quickly grabs the treasure chest, and Aquaman, who is kind of his head is a bit out of it because of the mind control, they head back to the island, they open up the treasure chest, and Wally tries to steal the crown before Marine Marauder can get it, but then Aquaman takes it and puts it on himself. And they're like, Aquaman? And he's like, it's mine. It's like, not Aquaman, Enlil. And you believe that you had control over Aquaman this whole time, Marine Marauder, but it was I who was controlling Aquaman. You're just a pawn. I'm gonna use my crown to raise the oceans of the world and destroy everything. And so he starts raising the oceans to destroy the island. Wally tells Marine Marauder to get everyone into the cave to safety. And so, but she doesn't do that. And so Wally goes to fight Enlil-controlled Aquaman, but Enlil is controlling the water and stuff, so he just hits Wally with water and makes it really hard for him to get to Aquaman. But because Wally can't hear anything due to all of the water, he assumes Enlil can't hear anything either, and sneaks up to him and smashes into him, knocking the crown off and freeing Aquaman of his control. And then Marine Marauder goes and grabs the crown. And Aquaman and Wally are like, we gotta get to safety. Marauder, you gotta come with us. Otherwise, you're gonna die. And she's like, no, it's my crown. And Wally's like, I've only got time to save one person. It's a pretty easy choice. I'm gonna save Aquaman. So he takes Aquaman to safety, shuts up the cave with rocks. And Marine Marauder is like, yes, the power is mine at last. The power vested in me. I crown myself Queen of the Seven Seas. Do you hear me? Queen of the Seven. And then she just gets hit by this tirade of water and dies. Massive tidal wave hits the island and kills her. And Aquaman and Wally are kind of like, the next day, they're kind of like, maybe Marine Marauder survived. Maybe she's all good. And then it just shows her, underwater with her arm sticking out of a bunch of rubble. And she's fucking dead. And, yeah, that's it. Aquaman manages to help get the ship back to safety and everyone using the help of the sea creatures. And Wally and Linda decide to head back home after a pretty insane adventure. Alright, so issue 67, The Return of Abra Kadabra. Written by Mark Waid, Greg LaRocque and Jose Marzan are back. So it begins with this rich couple who are kind of turning their nose up to a homeless guy. The woman's like, don't want to work, dreadful individuals won't work, don't want to work, forever showing up hat in hand. And something inside of her husband's hat is like, hand, let's give a great big hand to the world's greatest showman, Abra! And then he looks up and, sees a billboard that says that the Flash is performing with Abra Kadabra at a special event. So Abra realizes that somebody is using his name and that he needs to do something about it. He looks kind of decrepit and stuff now, and we'll find out why. So we go to this event, and it's an event held by Pied Piper to help homeless people. And so Mark Waid is continuing that whole storyline. So Wally is currently serving as a one-man basketball team against this other basketball team in order to raise money for homeless people. And he wins because he's just so fast, he's using his super speed. So after he wins, Pied Piper and Linda go and get some food. And while they're eating, Wally crosses paths with this guy who's going by the name Abra Kadabra. And Wally's just like, man, I hate the fact that you're using the name of a supervillain. And he's like, hey, I don't care. I just care about the performance. And Wally's like, well, Abra Kadabra was a real dude, and if he were to show up, he wouldn't like this, and he'd probably get his revenge on you, right? I'm just warning you, dude, be careful. And so this Abra Kadabra, this fake Abra Kadabra guy, goes to do a performance where he surrounds himself by a bunch of cards, and Wally's like, I've seen this performance before, the cards are gonna fall down, he'll disappear, and then all of a sudden the cards catch on fire, and Wally's like, no, that's not supposed to happen. And you can hear the guy screaming. He's like, ah! He's like, gotta put out this fire real quick. So Wally tries to put out the fire. He manages to do so, but after he's done putting out the fire, he flips over one of the cards, and it turns out the guy that was using Abra Kadabra's name has been trapped in one of the cards. And is presumably dead because he never gets freed from it. And that's when Abra Kadabra shows up, because everyone's applauding, thinking that it's a part of the show. Abra Kadabra shows up to take the applause, and Wally's just like, why do you look so freaking weird? Abra's arm comes off and starts attacking Wally, and he's like, why are you so decrepit and stuff? And one of the guys in the audience is like, who knows, from, one of the women is like, I didn't see this in the program, George. Who is that? And he's like, who knows, for magicians. What's his name? Houdini? And Abra's like, Houdini? How dare you? Houdini was a charlatan, a cheat, a base fraud. Houdini swore to perform the ultimate magical feat. He vowed to return from the dead. Dear ladies and gentlemen, Houdini failed, where Abra Kadabra has succeeded. And he explains to Wally that, like, back when they last encountered, he died and then was stuck in hell as, like, a specter in between, like, stuck between hell and the real world. And eventually he gained the power to bring himself back. And Wally's like, maybe that's not the case. Maybe you weren't actually dead. Did you ever think of the fact that, like, maybe the explosion just fried your teleporting shit and, like, you became phased in between worlds and then eventually your technology repaired itself and that's when you came back? Like, did you ever think about that? Like, maybe it, like, think about it. Your best trick ever, and you, of all people, had no audience. And Abra Kadabra is like, then I'd say that calls for an encore. Yes, today everyone dies. Everyone. They'll all go together, and Abra Kadabra will bring them back from the dead. And so Wally is about to face Abra, and that's when a mysterious woman shows up with a gun and interrupts their fight, trying to shoot at Abra. And Wally believes that she's trying to kill her, so he saves Abra's life, and then Abra teleports away, and Wally and this woman confront each other, and they're like, what have you done? And that's when she reveals that she's come from the future in order to capture Abra Kadabra, because they sent him from the future to the past, believing that if they sent him to the 20th century, it might set him straight because, you know, of the way that the state that the 20th century is in. She also reveals that she doesn't have a name because she hasn't earned a name yet, and that she's known as a peregrine, a hunter. So she and Wally decide to head off in order to find Abra Kadabra, and Wally hates her and is just putting up with her. He's like, I'd drop her off the side of a building if I could, but I need her in order to get Abra Kadabra. So they head to a bridge where they find Abra Kadabra on top of the bridge, and that's when they realize that Abra wasn't just talking about destroying the entire arena and killing everyone. He was talking about killing everyone in the entire city. So she tries to shoot at him, but Abra dodges and part of the bridge is destroyed. So Wally tries to capture the rubble created by the blast to stop people from getting hurt. And then she's just like, man, this is futile. You know, he'll exhaust his power. But I'm wasting my time. Look at his energy readout. It's staggering. He'll be much easier to capture once he drains himself with his little tantrum. And Wally's like, what? He can't be serious. What about the people? And she's like, their history. And Wally's like, not if I can help it. So he goes up and he grabs Abra as Abra's power is surging, and they both start falling, and Wally has lost his footing. And so the hunter takes an opportunity to shoot at Abra, and Wally thinks that she succeeds and has teleported Abra back to the future, but it turns out that she hit Wally as well, and all three of them had been teleported to the future. Or maybe just one of them. I don't know. She's in the future, but, like, her hair is gone, which is weird. Unless it's supposed to be a different hunter. Yeah, I think it's supposed to be a different one. So Wally and Abra have been transported to the future without her, and Wally's just like, oh boy, this isn't quite what I had in mind. So in the next issue, we'll get to see what happens when Wally and Abra Kadabra end up in the 64th century, which I think is the first time Wally has ever traveled. It's not the first time Wally has ever traveled to the 64th century. He did so in, like, it's the first time Wally has. Barry did previously. So this is the first time Wally has traveled to the 64th century. So we're about to see how that turns out. And so we make it to the final issue of the week. Issue 68. Beat the Clock. So, Wally, Abra Kadabra, and this peregrine lady have all ended up in the future. And when they get there, they find out that there's a bunch of people rebelling against this thing known as the Clockwork. And so Wally has to save the peregrine lady because she's his only hope of getting back to his own time. And he notices that Abra is kind of like cheering on all of these rebels and stuff. And he finds out that Abra was, like, the leader of these rebels when he was in the future, and he was the one that started this whole movement against the Clockwork. We'll find out what the clockwork is. But, so he and a bunch of the rebels get captured by the authorities. And then before Wally can do anything to stop them, the authorities just kill all of the rebels except for Abra, and Wally's just like, no! And so the Peregrine Lady says that he's going to be returned to his proper time. First, however, Citizen Abra must be attended to. His purpose must be served. And Wally's just like, purpose? What purpose? You're the ones who exiled him in the first place. What do you want with him now? And she's just like, we don't want anything. Like, we want nothing. Wanting involves individual decision making. We follow the will of the Chronarch. And so they take Wally to meet the Chronarch, who is this giant floating robot head that has basically created this thing called the clockwork, which is in the heart of the city. It programs it. It is not the clockwork itself. It just programs it. And this clockwork heart basically controls everyone in the entire city and makes them, like, no one has individuality. No one can think for themselves. They all eat, sleep, rest, and, like, everything that they decide is made for them. And Wally has a massive problem with this, because he thinks individuality is incredibly important. And so he realizes that the reason why Abra has turned against, like, has been leading these rebels is because he was one of the first people in the future to desire individuality. And so Wally kind of realizes that Abra's one of the good guys in the future. So Abra Kadabra is taken out to the population in order to be executed as an example in front of them. So the Peregrine Lady is about to execute him, and Wally is like, that's enough, I've had it. And he knocks her out of the way, and Abra teleports away. And then he reappears in a brand new costume and starts using, like, his magic powers on the Peregrine Lady. And then Wally is like, and then Abra's like, what now? Do you dare attack me once more? And Wally's like, and waste your time? Are you kidding? Who am I to keep such a majestic performer as yourself from his adoring public? So by telling Abra that, Abra is then distracts the public because he sees them as his adoring fans, which gives Wally time to go to the Chronarch so that he can go find the clockwork and destroy it. And take it down so that he no longer needs to... so that he can, like, free everyone's will so that they can think for themselves and have individuality. So he gets to the central clockworks, and he realizes that because it's the future, there's no such thing as, like, machinery and stuff anymore. It's all just a complete, like, light show of energy and stuff. But he sees something that kind of resembles a metal band, but it's made out of energy. So he decides to run on it. And, like, so he can't slow it down, but he decides, maybe I can speed it up. So he starts running on it. And Wally's just like, anarchy? You want anarchy? I'll give you anarchy. Do the math. If this bad boy is time to regulate all human activity, then by jamming it into overdrive, I can throw this entire metropolis into a tizzy. Cool. A whole city of flashes. So by running on it, he starts breaking the central clockworks and starts giving people, like, messing up people's daily routines and things. And then Wally, this is my favorite part, Wally starts thinking to himself, I'm not even from here. Do I really have the right to make this happen? To set myself up as a one-man revolutionary army? To overthrow the government and to throw this entire society into pandemonium? Do I? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I just love it. Wally just enjoys, like, ruining this future regime and giving people individuality. It's kind of Mark Waid creating this idea for Wally where he's like, he's the people's man, you know, and he believes in free will. So, you know, Abra is still busy distracting and, like, attacking guards and things, so Wally is able to go around and save some people, and then he convinces the Peregrine Lady to teleport him and Abra back to the present because it's better than Abra staying in the future because he's causing so much trouble. So she reluctantly agrees, sends Abra and Wally to the present, and she says that she's going to send them back to the time that they were when they were transported to the future, which just happens to be when they were falling out of the sky. So Wally's like, ah, crap, I don't want to end up on an obituary column. And so he sees, like, a pile of garbage and manages to steer himself and Abra over to the garbage and land into it. Abra has been knocked out, like he's passed out from the trip. So Wally rips out his machinery so that his magic doesn't work, and then takes him to prison. Abra basically says what he did in the future, and he was like, "Oh, like I'm being praised in the future and stuff," and like the court just deemed him crazy and locked him away, and so Abra is kind of left to suffer in prison without anyone to love him, and like none of the police officers will even let him do a magic trick. So he's just like in his jail cell, and he's like, "Pick a card, any card. Pick a card," I said, "please. God, please." And he just like drops all the cards and is like screaming. And Wally is like, "Thanks to me, he's out of tricks. His show is over, and he's trapped forever in a world not his own. I almost feel sorry for him, but hey, that's showbiz." And he talks about how like Abra hates him now, like more now than ever. So maybe we'll get to see Abra again. I really liked this story arc. I can see why people really like Mark Waid's Flash. I already knew that Mark Waid was a big fan of Abra Kadabra and made a point to like use him a lot in his run. But there's good reason for that, because he has great ideas for the character. Like Abra Kadabra was always a villain that like I never really cared about because he was a one-note villain. And he wasn't used enough. No one ever did enough with him, and I'm glad that Mark Waid is actually doing something interesting with him, making him a very complicated character. You know, in the future, he's a good guy. You know, all he wants to do is to be loved and adored by people. He just has the wrong way of going about it. And that's what makes him such a compelling and interesting character. But anyway, that's going to be it for this week of the Marvel and DC Retrospective Podcast. Next week, I said we were going to be doing Eclipse of the Darkness Within, but that's actually not the case. We're going to be doing Superman Panic in the Sky, which was a small event that happened in between War of the Gods and Eclipso, and then the week after that we'll do Eclipso, and then we'll be back to the Flash. So if you enjoyed this episode, feel free to please follow the podcast, please rate it, share it around to people, especially if they like the Flash, and tune in next week for Panic in the Sky, the week after that for Eclipso. That's probably going to be a 2-week thing, because I think there's quite a few issues of Eclipso, and then after that, once we're done with that, we'll be back to the Flash again. So hope you have a good day wherever you are, or good night, good morning, wherever in the world you are listening to this, and I hope to see you next week for Panic in the Sky. Have a good one.